I want to bring in Jim Merrill. He's a top New Hampshire campaign strategist who has served as an advisor to multiple GOP presidential campaigns in the Granite State, including Mitt Romney in 2012 and Marco Rubio in 2016. Jim, thanks so much for joining us tonight. Trump has the momentum coming out of Iowa. What do you think his chances are to win big in New Hampshire?
Well, I mean, listen, it was a great night for Donald Trump in Iowa last night, but not surprising either. I think we knew coming in that, Trump was in a good position in Iowa. The electorate there was favorable to him. New Hampshire's different. So Trump has, first place standing in New Hampshire right now, but Haley's been closing in for a few months here. She's in a good position right now in New Hampshire with a week to go.
Will the victory in Iowa, though, give him momentum into New Hampshire with voters there?
I don't think so. Trump's numbers in New Hampshire have been pretty static in the last, really the last year. He's been in the low to mid 40s, which is a good number, but he's not really grown that vote share. And typically, historically, New Hampshire hasn't looked to Iowa for direction on the primary. Mike Huckabee, Ted Cruz, Rick Santorum, none of them did well in New Hampshire. So I think it was a good night for him, but it stands alone as an Iowa night. Now we're in New Hampshire, and he's got to try and close the deal here. Look, it's clear he'd like to end this process the day after New Hampshire and declare victory, and Nikki Haley clearly is not going to cede the ground to him.
Talk to me about Nikki Haley's chances there. There's no Democratic primary, as we went over with Ali Vitale there. So is this going to help Nikki Haley? Do you see Democrats, you see independents going to Nikki Haley and supporting her on the primary night?
Right. Well, just one clarification. So Democrats cannot vote in the Republican primary next week. Registered undeclared voters can, but Democrats can only vote in the Democratic primary. The deadline to change their status was a few months ago. But your point is well taken, which is I expect a large group of undeclared voters to participate in the Republican primary, primarily because, Joe Biden's not competing here and Dean Phillips has failed to catch fire. So, those undeclared voters, they don't work as a monolith. Some are conservative, some are moderate, but they go to where the action is. And the action right now in New Hampshire is on the Republican side. So I do expect her to benefit from an influx of undecided voters participating in the Republican primary.
Do you think the canceling of this debate is going to matter at all? I don't know if New Hampshire voters were looking forward to seeing another showdown between DeSantis and Nikki Haley. Former President Trump was not going to attend. Is this a smart play on Nikki Haley's part, or did the voters in New Hampshire deserve a debate?
Yeah, I'm torn on that one. But I think for folks that watched Haley and DeSantis debate, and I used that term loosely last week, we may all benefit from not seeing another repeat performance of that. I think it's a calculated risk on the Haley team's part. They clearly want to couch this as a two-person race, and I think they're right. I mean, Ron DeSantis is here in New Hampshire right now, but the reality is this is a Trump-Haley race over the next week, and that's what the debate's going to be. So, I think there may be some people I personally would like to see a debate. But I don't think it's going to cost them in the end.
I want to put up something the Wall Street Journal had on their editorial pages today. Obviously, an influential conservative editorial board. They wrote, Mr. DeSantis faces no clear path to the nomination. He's well behind Ms. Haley in New Hampshire and South Carolina. If he believes, as he says, that Mr. Trump can't win in November, he should leave the race and give Ms. Haley a chance to take on Mr. Trump one-on-one. So, Jim, you've been part of campaigns that didn't look so strong heading into New Hampshire, heading out of New Hampshire. The Wall Street Journal has put this on their editorial pages. A lot of Republicans read the Wall Street Journal. What do you think? Is this fair, or is it still too early to start asking people to drop out?
As you know, there's been a winnowing process leading up to this point. Christie, was under a lot of pressure to withdraw here in the last week to 10 days. And so, listen, it's a tough decision to get into a race for president. It's a tough decision to get out. We saw this dynamic in 2016 when multiple candidates running against Donald Trump thought they had a theory of case that would help them win the nomination. That was ultimately proved to be incorrect. The field is winnowed more quickly this time. Ron DeSantis had a tough night last night. He put all his eggs in the Iowa basket. He made a big investment there, and he walked away from New Hampshire a few months ago. He had the governor's support, the evangelical leader's support, and still he finished 30 points down, just ahead of Nikki Haley. So, I think they've got to have that conversation amongst themselves. But let's also think that if Ron DeSantis were to drop out tomorrow, there's a fair amount of his vote that might actually go to Donald Trump, so it may not actually help Nikki Haley.
It is a really good point. Speaking of Chris Christie, him dropping out, do you think most of his voters go to Nikki Haley, or are they spread out?
I think she'll get the lion's share of them. I think that for some, there's a lot of loyalty there going back 8 years. I suspect Christie's still going to get a couple of percentage points on the ballot next week, even though he's not actively running any longer. But I think the lion's share will go to Nikki Haley, and she will, in fact, benefit from his withdrawal. But I can't say it'd be a one-for-one. I don't think 12% of Christie's vote is going to all move to her, but I think she'll get a fairly substantial portion of that. We just don't have any data yet post-Christie withdrawal to see where exactly it's going, but I expect a fair amount of it will go to her.
So, Jim, we saw that Governor DeSantis had the governor of Iowa's endorsement, right? He came in a far second place. We know that there in your state of New Hampshire, Nikki Haley has the endorsement of Governor Sununu. Will that help?
Yeah, look, I think what we're about to see is not all endorsements are created equal. With all due respect to Governor Reynolds, that was a very traditional endorsement. She certainly helped him out there. But look, if you see what Chris Sununu has done for Nikki Haley since his endorsement of her 6 weeks or so ago, he's not only done enormous work here on the ground with her, traveling with her everywhere, and making personal phone calls to bring people over to her team, but he's become a very effective national surrogate for her. And Chris Sununu is a force of nature, and Nikki Haley is certainly benefiting from that right now. My view, in the closing week of a New Hampshire primary, you've got a campaign here like you're running for governor of New Hampshire, and Nikki Haley seems to be prepared to do that, and there's no better guide to help her do that than the current governor, who's been so successful.
You think, will it benefit Trump to hone in and really attack Nikki Haley over this next week, or is that a bad strategy? So should he sort of play the main candidate? Should he kind of almost play the nominee role and ignore her?
Yeah, he has benefited thus far. He's come into this cycle as the effective incumbent, a quasi-incumbent, and he's benefited from that in terms of the ballot standing and where he's been. And so he's largely been able to have his PAC and others make attacks. Well, he's kind of steered clear. And you saw his remarks last night after winning Iowa. It was very conciliatory and trying to bring people together, which I think surprised some folks. But, he's shown the ability to do that in the past. So I think that's a question, I think, for their data. The Trump team is much more organized this time. They've got a strong, tough team. My guess is they're looking at the data closely. They have a pretty good idea of where they are in New Hampshire. I think if you begin to see him draw some tough contrasts and make some attacks on Haley, then they're nervous about where she is.
All right, Jim Merrill, an expert on the state of New Hampshire. We'll see if all your predictions and some of your forecasting come to be true. We'll be checking in with you throughout the week. Jim, always great to have you on the show. Thank you for that.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.